Objection number 7 is a narration reported by Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal rahmatullahi alayhi, and it's authentic narration. And this objection is very important because by answering this objection we will learn a lot of principles, inshallah. It's a hadith reported by Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal, and the hadith, the chain of transmission, meaning those people who narrate the hadith, they are reliable. So the hadith is regarding the Abdullah bin Mas'ud radiyallahu ta'ala radiyallahu anhu. He said regarding the mu'awwadhatayn, قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ الْفَلَقِ and قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ النَّاسِ. The last two surahs of the Quran, إِنَّهُمَا لَيْسَتَا مِنْ كِتَابِ اللَّهِ, that these two surahs are not from the Quran. So this is the objection. What is the objection? The Abdullah bin Mas'ud radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, who according to Bukhari had the most knowledge regarding the Quran, and he was amongst the fuqaha, meaning those Sahaba who were jurists and who could derive rulings from Quran and Sunnah. He is saying the قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ الْفَلَقِ قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ النَّاسِ, both of these surahs are not part of the Quran. Now this is the objection the Orientalists bring. And the hadith, as I mentioned, the chain of transmission, الرُّوَاتْ كُلُّهُمْ ثِقَات, they are all reliable, as mentioned by Hafiz ibn Hajar and Nuruddin al-Haythami rahimahullah. So how do we answer this question? So there's a few ways of answering this question. But the first answer that I'm going to give is based on principle, and I want the brothers to please remember this principle. It's a very important principle. The principle is that when a single chain of transmission, meaning when there is a hadith from one chain, this is called khabr wahid. Khabrul ahad. In the science of hadith is called khabrul ahad. When a single chain of transmission, when it goes against those narrations and those reports which are overwhelming, mutawatir, or it goes against the verse of the Quran, that single chain of transmission, that single hadith, it will be rejected, even though it is authentic. Does that make sense? Does everybody understand this? Yes? Yes? I'll repeat it again. So when you find a hadith, because sometimes it's an authentic hadith, authentic hadith, and they haven't learned the science of hadith. That's why sometimes brothers come and speak to me and they say, this is inside authentic hadith. I said, brother, what book have you studied in usul hadith, in the principle of hadith? We are not supposed to act upon authentic hadith, because if we do, we've got a big problem here. Abdullah bin Mas'ud, hadith is authentic. Hadith is authentic. So that's why it is very important that we know the principle of hadith. And in the science of hadith, the muhaddithun, this is a unanimous opinion, that when a single hadith or a single chain of transmission, so we have a hadith, like for example Abdullah bin Mas'ud, okay, so from Abdullah bin Mas'ud, Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal reports, and the chain that comes is one chain, okay? It's called sanad. Sanad. A chain from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or in this scenario from Abdullah bin Mas'ud. It comes to us from a single chain. When this single chain, when it goes against several other chains which are reporting one thing, that single chain will be rejected. It will not be acted upon, even though it is authentic. Does that make sense? So, an example, let me give you an example. You have a classroom of 50 children. 49 are saying one thing, and the one child is saying something else. even that one child is a good child, is an honest child, but will the teacher take this one child over the 49? No. Something went wrong in his transmission. Yes? Does that make sense? Okay. The reason I'm mentioning this because Abdullah bin Mas'ud radiallahu ta'ala, and the qira'at that we read, قُلْ أَعُوذُ رَبِّ الْفَلَقِ and قُلْ أَعُوذُ رَبِّ النَّاسِ is part of the qira'at, yes? Those chains which are mutawatir, meaning they are overwhelming, hundreds and thousands have reported them in every time and era. All of them, a lot of them go through Abdullah bin Mas'ud. A lot of them go through Abdullah bin Mas'ud, like Imam Hamza Qira, for example, Imam Kisai, for example. They go through Abdullah bin Mas'ud. What does that mean? That means Abdullah bin Mas'ud regarded Qul A'udhu Rabbil Falaq, Qul A'udhu Bin Nas part of that. That's why there's hundreds of chains from him. So now we've got this one single chain and you've got hundreds. Which one do you take? The hundreds. Now, but there's also an explanation for this. There's also an explanation for the single chain. Alhamdulillah, this is the beauty about the scholars of Islam, that even when one hadith goes against the many, so most of the time, which the ulama, they try not to completely reject the hadith. They try to give it some sort of explanation. So in this circumstance, even though this one single chain from Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, which mentioned that the mu'awwadatayn, meaning the last two surahs of the Quran, are not part of the Quran, we give an explanation to this. And the explanation we give is that in the Mus'haf of Abdullah bin Mas'ud radiallahu ta'ala, in the Mus'haf of, because I told you there was many masahib, there were many manuscripts. In the Mus'haf of Abdullah bin Mas'ud, which he didn't give to Usman Ghani, by the way. Yeah? This is a historical event. Abdullah bin Mas'ud did not give his manuscript to Usman Ghani. When Usman Ghani asked for everybody manuscript and he burnt all of them, Abdullah bin Mas'ud said, I'm not giving you mine. And the reason he said, I'm not giving you mine, he said, I've read from this to the Prophet ﷺ several times, how can I give you this? Our love. This is a personal thing. So inside his Mus'haf, قُلْ أَعُوذُ رَبِّ الْفَلَقِ قُلْ أَعُوذُ رَبِّ النَّاسِ wasn't written. It wasn't written. This doesn't mean he didn't regard them as part of the Quran. He didn't just write them. Why didn't he write them? Now this is the question. The reason to this is because Abdullah bin Mas'ud believed that all of the ummah, they know the last two surahs. And the evidence to prove this point is that Abdullah bin Mas'ud radiallahu ta'ala is also authentically proven from him that he didn't write Surah Fatiha in the Quran too, in his Mus'haf. Surah Fatiha. He didn't write Surah Fatiha inside his Mus'haf. So what does that mean? Does that mean he didn't regard Surah Fatiha part of the Quran too? No. When he was asked, why have you written Surah Fatiha? He said, if I was to write Surah Fatiha, I would have to write it before every surah. Why? Because when a person in Salah, before he reads any surah, what do they read? Surah Fatiha. So we give an explanation that yes, the narrator who mentions, so that this also answers the question that okay, if the hadith is authentic, meaning the people who are transmitting the hadith, if they're reliable, how can they have said such a big thing that he didn't regard it part of the Quran? So we say the initial narrator made a mistake. And the mistake that he made was that Abdullah bin Mas'ud radiallahu ta'ala anhu he didn't regard them part of the Quran. The only thing was that he didn't write them inside his Mus'haf. And this is where the narrator made a mistake. Yes? That's why Allama Nawawi rahimahullah, Ibn Hazm rahimahullah, they mention that even though this hadith is authentic, meaning in and of itself, the chain of transmission are all reliable, the narrators, but it has three faults inside it. Number one, this hadith is ma'alul. Ma'alul means it has got a fault. Even though it's reliable, but it has a fault because of external reasons. Yeah? These are all terminologies of hadith. Number one, it goes against the overwhelming narrations of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. This one single. Number two, it is only transmitted from one narrator, Abdul Rahman bin Yazid Nakhai. He was the only guy who said, "Annahuma laysata min kitabillah, that Abdullah Mas'ud said that these are not part of the Quran. If you look at the other chains, and there, this isn't there. So this is shadh, irregular. And number three, even if we say that this hadith is authentic, it goes against mutawatir, which is the overall ruling. My throat has been bad for about a month. Please make dua. I'm struggling so bad. Somebody's holding me back. Khair. The reason I'm mentioning on this principle, because sometimes a lot of brothers, they don't understand this principle and they object on the four schools of fiqh. Yes? Like for example, just this fiqh issue. According to the Hanafi school, you're not allowed to combine between two prayers. You're not allowed to combine between. Let me give you an example. And this principle has been employed by the ulama and the fuqaha. You're not allowed to combine between two prayers, or the other schools you can. The Shafi'i school and the Hanbali school you can. This is a valid position of the ulama. I'm just giving an example. But some people object. They say, oh, Imam Abu Hanifa went against the authentic hadith. The authentic hadith is you can't combine between two prayers. So you say, look, yes, Imam Abu Hanifa didn't act upon that single hadith. It's khabr wahid of combining prayers. It's not mutawatir, it's khabri wahid. It goes against the Quranic verse, Inna salata kanat ala al-mu'minina kitaban mawquta, that indeed salah has been prescribed in its fixed time. You can't read salah in the other time. It has to be at its own time. This is a Quranic verse. And the Quran is definitive. It's mutawatir. So if a one single hadith goes against mutawatir, Imam Abu Hanifa's usul was that you don't take the single hadith. But even then, Imam Abu Hanifa gives an explanation of that single hadith is that down there in the combination of prayer, it doesn't mean literally combining, it means ostensible combination, apparent combination. And he gives narrations of Sahaba to prove this interpretation, that the Sahaba combined between Zohar and Asr. How did they combine this? They read Zohar in the last part of Zohar, and they read Asr in the beginning part. So a person who's looking from outside looks like he combined them. He did combine them, but it was a literal combination. It was an actual combination. It was ostensible and apparent combination. So this is all throughout fiqh. That's why brothers say, oh brother, it goes against authentic, this authentic, ya salam. They don't know the principles of hadith, they don't know fiqh, and that's why they have these problems. Yes? So this is a very important principle that I've just briefly mentioned. 3 more objections left. Objection number 8, and this objection is again by Arthur Jeffrey and the boys. Arthur Jeffrey is a Western Orientalist who objected on the preservation of the Quran, and he mentions the objection is regarding the compilation of the Quran in the time of Abu Bakr Siddiq radiyallahu ta'ala an. Abu Bakr Siddiq radiyallahu ta'ala an. If you remember, I mentioned the stages of the preservation of the Quran, and the second stage was when Abu Bakr Siddiq radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, him and Umar radiallahu ta'ala an, they instructed Zayd bin Thabit that the Quran should be compiled and gathered. If you remember at that point, I mean, what was the reason that Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu gave this suggestion to Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala an? Does anybody remember the reason? Yes, Hufaz. Yes. Hufaz. The Hufaz were killed. Yes, the Hufaz were killed. So Arthur and the other Orientalists, they say, look, when Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu said to Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala anhu that compile the Quran because Hufaz are being martyred and there is a chance that the Quran will be missing. So he says, look, from this we can understand, Bukhari hadith, from this we can understand that the reason behind Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu suggesting this was that people are losing the Quran because they are dying and hence it's going away from their memory. This proved that the Quran wasn't written. Yes, this proved the Quran wasn't written. Because when Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu said to Abu Bakr that, oh Abu Bakr, let's gather the Quran because Huffaz are being killed, they're being martyred, and there's a chance that the Quran will go missing. So what does that mean? That means that the Quran wasn't written, it was in the memory. Yes? You understand the objection? Now the answer is very simple. Allahu Akbar. The answer is that the Quran is mutawatir. Quran mutawatir meaning in every time and era so many people have reported the Quran that for all of them to gather and lie about this is impossible and absurd. Yes, this is the definition of mutawatir. Now when Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu suggested to Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala anhu, and if you remember the criteria which Zayd bin Thabit chose, Zayd bin Thabit radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he chose a criteria, was very strict, rigorous, and scrupulous. What was the criteria? That the Quran had to be written, and two people had to give witness that this was written under the supervision of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then later the Sahaba, including Zayd bin Thabit and Umar radiallahu ta'ala, would confirm and affirm this with their memory. Now Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, if the Sahaba who memorized the Quran by heart, if they all had died, if they all had become shaheed, or most of them, who would be there to approve the Quran? The written Quran that was written, who would be there to prove it? Would anybody be there to approve it? No, because nobody knows it by memory. So when Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu gave this suggestion to quickly gather the Quran, the reason he gave this suggestion was that now we still have a big group of Sahaba who have memorized the Quran, and if we gather the Quran, if we gather the paper, the leather, etc., they will be able to confirm it with their memory. But once they go, there'll be nobody to confirm it with their memory. This is the reason why Umar radiallahu ta'ala gave the suggestion. Subhanallah. And the evidence this is the authentic narration afterwards with Zayd bin Thabit. He followed a very strict criteria where they combined between the literature, what was written, and memory. It was not just done by written. No, they had to confirm it with their memory. There had to be testimony and witnesses upon that the Quran was written under the supervision of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this was a quick objection number 8. Two more objections. Objection number 9 and objection number 10. Objection number 9 is very simple. It is a historical inaccuracy by the Orientalist. The Orientalist argues that it's same to this objection number 8. When Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu gave the suggestion, it was based because a lot of Huffaz were being martyred, and he referenced to the Battle of Yamama. The Battle of Yamama, where 70 Sahaba became shaheed. So the Orientalist argues that if you look at the Battle of Yamama, there were not 70 Huffaz, there were only a few new Muslims. That's his argument. So he's basically rejected the entire preservation of the Quran because the number 70 is not 70, it was less than that, and they were new Muslims, they were not Huffaz of the Quran, they had not memorized the Quran. But again, this is absolutely absurd, because if you go through Ibn Kathir, Tariq al-Tabri, you will see that the Sahaba, there were approximately 660 Sahaba who took part in the Battle of Yamama. And Frederick Charlie, he's the one who is the pioneer to this objection. If you look at the Battle of Yamama, there was 660 Sahaba. 360 were Ansar and 300 were Muhajirin. Out of them, only 58 of the names are preserved. 58. And from those 58, most of them are Hafiz of the Quran. So the 58 names that have been preserved, the 58 names that have been preserved, most of them are Hafiz of the Quran. So imagine the names that haven't been preserved. Yes? Amongst them, there was Salim, Mawla Abi Hudayfa radiallahu ta'ala anhu, who was the Imam in Masjid Quba before the Hijrah of Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu would also read Salah behind him. There was Zayd bin Khattab, he was amongst the martyrs, who was the brother of Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu. Zayd bin Khattab He was the brother of Umar ibn Khattab. After he got martyred, Umar radiallahu ta'ala would say, every time I walk in the Medina and a slight wind passes me, I remember my brother. Yes? Ubadah bin Bashar, there was Zayd bin Thabit, Yazid bin Thabit, who was the brother of Zayd bin Thabit, the uncle of Bara bin Azib, Qais bin Harith, Mu'adh bin Ma'a'id, Zubayr radiallahu ta'ala an, Uthman bin Mad'un radiallahu ta'ala an, no, his son, Sa'ib bin Uthman radiallahu ta'ala an. So just the synopsis is that this is an inaccurate anecdote that's been quoted by this Orientalist. So that wasn't really a very strong objection. Last objection, and this is a bit of an interesting one. The last objection, again pioneered by Arthur Jeffrey inside the book named Introduction to the Quran, he mentions, and this objection is regarding the qira'ah. This objection is regarding the qira'ah. Now the objection is, how many ways of reciting the Quran? 7 ways, yes? Alhamdulillah, everybody understands this. 7. Sabatu ahruf. Now if you remember, Uthman radiallahu ta'ala, why did he burn all of the other manuscripts and only kept one manuscript without dots and without i'rab? People don't get confused, number one. And the other qira'at that people recite, they can also be included. They can also be incorporated inside this mushaf. Yes, this was the reason. Now, Mr. Jeffrey, his objection is that these qira'at that have come by, we have these different types of reading. It's not because they're different qira'at, it's because there was no zabazair pesh, there was no i'rab in the Quran, and there was no dots in the Quran. So people read according to their own intellect. And because they read according to their own intellect, a lot of qira'at and a lot of recitation were produced over time. This is the objection, subhanallah. So let me just repeat the objection again. In the time of Uthmani Ghani, he made one mushaf. And that mushaf was divided of dots, and he had no zabar, zair, pesh, dhamma, i'rab, tashkil. And the reason this was is to incorporate the other qira'at. So it was easy for everybody to use this one mushaf and recite their own recitation. But Mr. Jaffer is objecting that the reason these qira'at came by, it was not because they were from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but because people were reading the mushaf of Uthmani Ghani radiallahu ta'ala an without zabazair, pesh and dots, and they read according to their own analogy, own qiyas, own intellect, which then entailed these several different recitations. This is the objection. The answer is very simple. The answer is very simple. Number one, we know why Uthmani Ghani did this. That's number one. The hadith clearly mentioned why Uthmani Ghani did this, to incorporate the other qira'at. Number two, there are 3 conditions. I didn't mention this previously, but I mention it now, so you know. There are 3 conditions for any qira'ah to be accepted. So if anybody reads in different qira'ah, we have to look, do they have these 3 conditions? Condition number 1, that qira'ah has to be in accordance to the mushaf of Uthmani Ghani. Rasm al-Khat, meaning written according to the mushaf of Uthmani Ghani. Condition number 1. So if a person is reading qira'ah and his qira'ah is not in congruity or is not in accordance or cannot facilitate the Rasm al-Khat, the way of writing in Uthmani Ghani radiallahu ta'ala mushaf, it will not be accepted. So that's condition number 1. Does anybody understand condition number 1? Condition number 2, that qira'ah has to be according to the Arabic grammar, nahw and sarf. Simple. Yeah? So you can't put Farsi words in there or Pashto words for that matter. Number 3, which is the most important condition, that qira'ah has to be authentically proven from Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam. These are the 3 conditions. So going back to the initial point, Uthmani Ghani, we know why he he did what he did. So he could incorporate all of the qira'ah. Now, having these three conditions in mind, there are examples in the Quran. There are examples in the Quran where a different qira'ah, a different recitation could have been recited. It could have been recited. It met condition number one, meaning it was according to the writing of Mus'haf Uthmani. It is also correct to recite like this according to the Arabic language. But because it was not proven from Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, all of the ummah have rejected that recitation. Let me give you an example. In Surah Baqarah, in one place you have وَلَا يُقْبَلُ مِنْهَا شَفَاعَةٌ وَلَا يُؤْخَذُ مِنْهَا عَدْلٌ وَلَا هُمْ يُنصَرُونَ. So لَا يُقْبَلُ, the shafa'a, intercession on the day of judgment will not be accepted from anybody. لَا يُقْبَلُ, it comes with ya, and it also comes with ta. لَا يُقْبَلُ وَلَا تُقْبَلُ. It means exactly the same. Now later on in Surah Al-Baqarah, it also comes wala, so you can read la yuqbalu and la tuqbalu. So if you don't have the zabar zair page and the dots, just imagine yuqbalu without the just the ya without any dots. So you can read tuqbalu and yuqbalu. Yes, it's only like a line. Okay. I'm giving you the example so you can read both. So now la yuqbalu, la tuqbalu. Number one is according to the Mus'haf of Uthmani Ghani. Number two, Arabic wise, it makes sense. And number three is also authentically proven from Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now let me give you an example. لا تنفعها شفاعة ولا هم ينصرون. لا تنفعها شفاعة. That the intercession on the day of judgment will not benefit people. Now لا تنفعها is only with ta. Is only with ta. It's not with ya. Even though reciting with ya, number one, is according to the Mus'haf Uthmani Ghani, it makes sense. And number two, according to Arabic grammar also, it will make sense. But because it's not authentically proven from Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, nobody is la yanfa'uha. And there are several other examples like this. There's only one person in the entire Islamic history. There's only one person in the entire Islamic history, his name was Abu Bakr bin Muqsim, who said that you can look at the Mus'haf Uthmani and whatever qira'ah makes sense to you, you can read, as long as it's according to the Arabic grammar. He didn't agree with condition number three. Because of this, the Khalifa, the king of the time, summoned him inside the court, made him do tawbah. So, and he was basically charged with such a big crime. So throughout the ummah, the whole ummah agrees. The whole ummah agrees that the qira'ah is only valid when these three conditions apply. So the objection that Usmani Ghani radiallahu ta'ala, these qira'at were fabricated because of the Mus'haf is totally wrong, because there's such a strict criteria. There's a criteria, we have to follow this criteria that even when the qira'ah makes sense and it goes according to the Mus'haf Usman and is correct in the Arabic grammar, but it's not proven from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it will be rejected. So on this note, inshallah, hopefully tomorrow we'll start Surah Fatiha. There's two books. A few brothers have walked off. I'll bring them tomorrow again, inshallah. These two books I want to mention, worth buying, inshallah, and is regarding the preservation of the Quran and the history of how the Quran was preserved. Now this book here is in English. Is the same author which I mentioned a few days ago, Sheikh Mustafa Al-Azami, who graduated in the 50s from Deoband, and then he did his masters in Azhar in Egypt, and then he went did his PhD in Cambridge University, and he was also mashallah lecturer for decades. He passed away, I think, last year. Allah Ta'ala have mercy on him. He has written many works. This is actually a work on the preservation of the Quran, and he's answered the Orientalist in here. And the title of the book is The History of the Quranic Text, from Revelation to Compilation. From Revelation to Compilation. A comparative study with the Old and New Testament. He also does compare and contrast with Bible and others, and then you will realize and you will appreciate the Quran. Allahu Akbar. Yeah? And he actually has taken pictures of the manuscripts in there, photocopy scans. It's a very good book. This is one book I would suggest the brothers, especially those who speak the English language, inshallah, to buy, and it's very good to have this in your library. Everybody should have a library at home. Yeah, library. In the time of Spain, in Islamic Spain, when Islam was at its peak, and John II, the King of England, wrote a letter to the Khalifa of Spain, Andalus, that I have two sons, and I want you to educate them so they can bring back light and civilization to the UK.
The letter is still now.
Yeah, the letter is still there. Yes, preserved. The letter is still preserved. And to soften the heart of the Khalifa, he sent his niece to kiss the throne of the Khalifa as an intercession and as a means of softening his heart. So England was requesting and appealing that an Islamic university accepts the prince of the time for education. So at that time, when Muslims, this was the time when, it's hard for us to imagine that the Muslims were like this once upon a time. Allahu Akbar. People from Europe would travel to Islamic Spain for education. It was like the Oxford and Cambridge at the time. So at that time, it comes in narrations that every single house had a library. And the house that didn't have a library, people used to look down upon the house. Don't get married from that house, they don't have no library. Yes. Don't get married from that house, it doesn't have a library. Meaning, reading books and buying books and education was in every family, in every home. Like today we have the big shaitans, the big ones, the massive ones. When the mom sits down, watches dramas, the father sits to watch dramas, the sons and the daughters, they all say whatever. Everybody's become drama, man. You know, it's all about drama. There's no reality. It's all about drama now, there's no reality. So at that time when education and books, library, they had solid. The children were in books, the parents were inside books. So but this is very, very important. And not to praise my own self, but I try to spend a good portion of my money on books, alhamdulillah. Those books in the library there, they're not funded by the masjid, just to let you know, they're all mine, alhamdulillah. And I have a similar library in Bradford, bihamdillah ta'ala. And I heard this from my ustad, Allah ta'ala give him jazai khair. And I'm sharing this so you know. He said there's two big rewards in buying books, even if you don't read them. I'm not saying don't read them, read them. But even if you buy books and you don't read them, number one, you become a means of preserving the knowledge of Quran and Hadith. Your name will be written part of those people who spend their money in preserving Quran and Hadith. And number two, on the day of judgment, the ink of these books that you have bought will be weighed inside your scale. So it's like spending in the path of Allah, buying books, Quran and Hadith. So you should buy this book, inshallah. Books are quite expensive, I know. But look, I have a friend every Monday, he goes, I don't want to say his name, he might get embarrassed, he goes to Birmingham to eat. From Oxford all the way to Birmingham. Every Monday, for years, is like ma'amul, regular. I asked him how long does it take? He spent about 3-4 hours. Going there, coming back, the petrol. And how much do you pay for the food? Sometimes £70, sometimes £80. This happens, isn't it? £70, £80. People have no problem. They pay through the direct card, your debit card or card, and £70, £80 bill gone. My dear friends, if you spend and save £10, £20 a month, you can buy one book easily every month, inshallah, and then read this book. And this is about the preservation of the Quran and give you confidence. It will make your English better, inshallah. And the biggest thing is worship. Every letter you read of ilm, inshallah, you will inshallah be rewarded. That's in Urdu, in English. The book in Urdu, some brothers did ask, I'll mention it now. This is in Urdu. I really wish this can be translated, but it's a very big project. I was actually even thinking about to translate it, but I thought it was too big. There are almost 1,000 sides. I mean, we're not the same scholars are not, 30 volumes, 40 volumes. My mum mentioned one thing once and I thought, subhanAllah, how deep, how profound. She said if those scholars had WhatsApp and social media, they wouldn't write any of these books. I thought that's so true. So we can't do a lot of things because we are occupied and engaged in other things. So this is almost 1,000 sides, 900 sides in Difa al-Qira'at, where he has defended the different types of Qira'at. All of the objection on the narrators, on the transmissions, everything. Approximately 50 main objections of the Orientalists, and for each objection he's given 2, 3, 4 answers sometimes, alhamdulillah. His name is Abu Abdul Qadir Muhammad Tahir Rahimi. We used to live inside Medina al-Munawwara. May Allah have mercy on him. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us all the tawfiq and ability, and inshallah from tomorrow we will start أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. سبحان الله.